I never imagined that the quiet walk out of that glass tower on 6th Avenue would be the beginning of something extraordinary. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I just felt done. I had handed in my resignation with a polite nod, cleared my desk while everyone pretended not to notice, and stepped into the elevator for the last time. It was one of those strange cinematic moments, the kind where your life feels too still, too scripted, and you wonder if the universe has accidentally paused the scene. My name is Lena Tron. At the time, I was 29 years old, a senior marketing associate at Trivium Brands, a trendy, fast-growing consumer goods company with a reputation for chewing up young talent and spitting it out once they stopped being hungry enough. For years, I played the part they needed me to. I pitched campaigns, stayed late, said yes, even when my gut screamed no. I smiled through meetings where my ideas were used without credit, where I was told I was too artsy, or that my concepts were more Etsy than enterprise. It wasn't overt cruelty. It was death by 1,000 small dismissals. A comment here, a smirk there. The worst part, it was always the same people, the confident ones, the ones who drank their coffee black and wore blazers to casual Fridays. They laughed at my pottery, the little side hobby I adored. I'd bring in a mug now and then handmade and imperfect, and they'd call it quaint or worse, cute. One of them once whispered during lunch, "I swear she thinks she's running a farm in Brooklyn." I laughed along with them, but it stung. That week we had a product launch meeting. My concept for a minimalist, earth-toned brand aesthetic was overridden for a neon-saturated theme that looked like a bad Instagram filter. My manager, Greg, said in front of everyone, "Lena, it's 2023, not Woodstock." The room laughed. I smiled. I nodded. I went back to my desk, opened a new browser tab, and typed, "How to start a pottery business." I didn't make a scene. I didn't need to. I quietly typed up my resignation that night. I told them I was leaving to pursue personal growth. They barely looked up from their screens when I dropped the letter off the next morning. It was the cleanest breakup I'd ever had. No emotion. Just indifference. I think that was what hurt the most. Not that they didn't fight to keep me, but that they never really saw me in the first place. I walked out of the office carrying a cardboard box with 2 potted succulents, my notebooks, and the last ceramic cup I had brought in a clay marbled mug with my initials carved into the base. As I stepped into the sunlight, the city felt unusually loud, as if to fill the silence that had taken root in my chest. That afternoon, I went straight home to my tiny studio apartment in Queens. I sat on the floor surrounded by my unfinished pottery pieces, bowls with uneven rims, vases with fingerprints, mugs that wobbled just slightly on flat surfaces. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. I touched the glaze on a little cup I'd made the week before and whispered, "Let's see what happens." Starting Loon Pottery was less of a decision and more of a declaration. I opened an Instagram account. I built a Shopify site with a free template. I watched YouTube tutorials on photography and lighting using my cracked iPhone and a white poster board as a backdrop. My first listing went live 2 weeks after I quit a 3-piece mug set named Sunday Mornings. I priced it at $45. It sat unsold for 9 days. I remember refreshing the page constantly, my stomach twisting with every notification that turned out to be a friend just liking the photo. On day 10, I got my first real order from someone named Meredith in Ohio. I danced alone in my apartment, tears mixing with laughter. I packed the order like it was a museum artifact, writing a thank you note by hand and tying a sprig of dried lavender to the box. In the following weeks, I made exactly $238. Not enough to cover rent, but enough to prove the idea wasn't insane. My days were a blur of wheel throwing, clay glazing, photographing, packing, and responding to DMs. At night, I'd fall asleep with aching wrists and clay under my fingernails. Still, I felt alive in a way I never did behind a PowerPoint deck. I didn't tell many people what I was doing. Not out of shame, more out of fear that saying it out loud would invite the same condescension I just escaped. When former co-workers asked how I was doing, I'd say I was exploring creative projects. They'd smile, clearly assuming I was unemployed and struggling. Some even said things like, "It's great that you're taking time for yourself, you'll bounce back," as if what I was doing wasn't already bouncing forward. I poured my soul into every batch of pottery. I tracked the clicks, engagement rates, and conversion metrics, obsessively habits from my marketing days that I repurposed into fuel. I started noticing what people liked: muted tones, matte finishes, subtle imperfections. I leaned into the storytelling. Every piece had a name, a backstory. People weren't just buying cups, they were buying rituals, moments, reminders. 3 months in, I did a local pop-up market in Brooklyn. It was my first time selling in person. I wore a linen dress and had a tiny sign that read, "Loon Pottery, handmade with quiet joy." I expected polite smiles and pity purchases. Instead, I sold out in 4 hours. One woman said, "Your pieces feel like they belong in the quietest part of my morning." That line stayed with me. I went home that night with a nearly empty crate and a full heart. That same week, I got an email from a boutique in Portland wanting to carry my work, then another in San Francisco, then one in Vancouver. It wasn't viral fame. It was steady, gentle momentum, like the way glaze settles over clay, slow and beautiful. I still remembered Greg's words, "It's 2023, not Woodstock." I chuckled every time someone emailed asking if I had more of the Woodstock mugs. They had become my best sellers. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I was free. And for the first time in my life, I was creating something that couldn't be taken from me with a smirk or a snide comment. I didn't know then that this quiet rebellion would someday lead me right back to those same people, not as a peer, but as their boss. But that's a story for another day. For now, all you need to know is that I left a boardroom with nothing but a box of plants and dreams, and it was the best thing I ever did. The first 6 months after I quit my job felt like one long inhale, no exhale in sight. Clay dust clung to everything. My once pristine apartment was now a mosaic of drying racks, glazed samples, cracked mugs, and empty takeout containers. The floor was always gritty, the air carried a faint metallic scent, and every surface was layered in some stage of unfinished work. But I loved it, even when it was overwhelming, even when it felt like I was spinning more than just clay. In those early days, every decision was a coin toss between intuition and guesswork. I had no business plan, just a belief that maybe, just maybe people were tired of perfect, tired of mass-produced, tired of the fake. I remember spending hours watching tutorials on trimming techniques, marketing strategies, glaze chemistry, and SEO optimization. My browser history was a chaotic mix: how to fire pottery in a small kiln, best hashtags for handmade ceramics. Can I write off a pottery wheel on taxes? I was trying to be everything at once: artist, photographer, accountant, customer service rep, and shipping department. It was beautiful madness. The sales trickled in one mug at a time. My Instagram following grew slowly, organically. I didn't use ads, I couldn't afford them. I just told stories. Each post featured a piece with a caption like, "This mug was born out of a rainy afternoon," and a second cup of tea. People connected, they commented, they shared, and slowly they bought. But the chaos wasn't just artistic. It was financial, emotional, existential. My savings were dwindling fast. Rent loomed like a cloud every first of the month. I ate a lot of eggs, rice, and dollar store pasta. My idea of luxury became a fresh basil plant or a second glaze bucket. One day my card declined at the grocery store for a $12 purchase. I walked home clutching a bag of potatoes and tried not to cry. To make extra cash, I offered private pottery lessons on weekends. At first, I was terrified. Who was I to teach? But people came. A pair of sisters, a recently retired man, a teenage girl, and her mom. They laughed. They failed. They made beautiful mistakes, and I realized teaching wasn't just about technique. It was about permission, giving people space to create without judgment, something I never had in my old job. One night, I stayed up till 3 a.m. trying to finish a batch of 20 mugs for a boutique order. My hands were sore, my back ached, and I accidentally knocked over 2 finished pieces while reaching for my water bottle. They shattered instantly. I sat on the floor in silence, surrounded by broken clay, and let the tears come. That was the first night I genuinely questioned if I'd made a mistake. But even through the sobs, I knew I wouldn't go back. Not to the cold conference rooms, the hollow compliments, or the people who saw me as disposable. About 3 months in, something strange happened. A local influencer, someone I didn't even follow, bought one of my mugs anonymously and posted a photo of it next to her matcha latte. She wrote, "Found this handmade beauty from a loom pottery. It makes my mornings feel softer." That post got over 50,000 likes in 24 hours. My phone blew up. I had 172 orders in 2 days. I had a wait list. I had panic. I had no idea how to scale. My kiln was too small. My shelves were too few. I called my landlord and begged to rent the basement storage room. I borrowed money from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I hired my old college roommate Maya to help with packing and admin. She showed up with iced coffee and said, "Let's build something weird and beautiful." The chaos morphed into a rhythm: Monday throwing, Tuesday trimming, Wednesday glaze, Thursday fire, Friday pack, Saturday lessons, Sunday sleep or try to. My body hurt in places I didn't know existed, but my spirit was light. One morning, as I was glazing pieces on the fire escape because my studio was too cramped and the ventilation was better outside, I got a DM from someone at a well-known lifestyle magazine. They wanted to do a short feature on female-founded, slow-crafted brands. I said yes before I even finished reading the message. The feature went live 2 weeks later. It was short, just a paragraph and a few photos, but it changed everything. My inbox overflowed. Wholesale request interview invitations, collabs with designers. One email stood out. It was from a buyer at one of the largest home goods stores in the country. They wanted to carry a limited edition line of loom pottery in select stores. My hands trembled as I read it. I said no. It shocked even me, but I knew I wasn't ready. I had built something intimate, something soulful. I couldn't rush it into the machine of mass production. Not yet. Instead, I launched a seasonal pre-order model. 4 times a year, I'd release a curated collection with limited quantities. It sold out within hours. People set alarms. They camped out in my comments. It was surreal, but success brought new challenges. People started copying my designs. Competitors popped up with eerily similar aesthetics. And then there were the comments, the trolls who said I was overpriced, pretentious, or lucky. That last one always made me laugh, as if luck had stayed up night after night shaping clay with bleeding knuckles. And then came the email that stopped me cold, from Greg. "Hi, Lena. Hope you're well. Saw loom pottery in Dwell. Looks like you're doing great. We're actually looking for small brands to partner with for our upcoming lifestyle campaign. Would love to connect and see if there's potential synergy. Cheers, Greg. The same Greg who had once said, Lena, it's 2023, not Woodstock. I stared at that email for a long time. I thought about replying with a simple LOL. But instead, I drafted a response that was polite, professional, and sharp as a knife. Hi, Greg. Thanks for reaching out. At the moment, we're focusing on direct-to-consumer and select boutique partnerships aligned with our values. Wishing you the best with your campaign. Warmly, Lena Tram founder, Loon Pottery. No emojis, no hard feelings, just clarity. I sent it. Then closed my laptop and made myself a cup of tea in one of the first mugs I ever made. It wobbled slightly on the table. I didn't mind. That little flaw was proof of the journey. The chaos hadn't ended. It had just evolved. There were still delays, breakages, supply chain issues, and sleepless nights. But every day I was building something real, something honest, something that carried my fingerprints quite literally into the hands of strangers across the world. They used my cups for morning rituals for comfort, after heartbreak, for tea with mothers and wine with lovers, and that more than money or press or pride made all the chaos worth it. I didn't know yet that this handmade world I was crafting would soon collide again with the cold corporate one I'd left behind. But when it did, I'd be ready. Because chaos had taught me something the boardroom never could, how to keep going when everything breaks, and how to shape something better from the shards. If the first year of Loony Pottery was defined by survival, the second was about adaptation. I thought I had already experienced my biggest wave when that influencer posted my mug. But I had no idea what real demand felt like until the Morning Light collection. It started, as most of my collections did, with a feeling. I wanted something that captured quiet hope, soft yellows, sandy neutrals, and pale blue hues like the sky right before the world fully wakes up. I spent 2 months developing the glazes, adjusting my clay bodies, and hand-throwing over 300 pieces. It was the biggest collection I had ever prepared. I launched it on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m., just as the name suggested. It sold out in 11 minutes. I stared at my screen mouth slightly open, unsure if I was hallucinating. Orders from all over Michigan, Tokyo, Melbourne, Cape Town. The analytics showed thousands of people on the site at once like it was a sneaker drop. My phone buzzed nonstop. Email confirmations, DM congratulations, requests for restocks. I sat there in silence, then started laughing. A strange, breathless laugh. It didn't feel real. That was the moment Loon Pottery stopped being a side hustle or an artistic rebellion. It became a full-fledged business. The kind that required accountants, fulfillment partners, shipping strategies, and Gulp employees. I moved into a new studio space in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. It had actual windows, a ventilation system, room to breathe. I hired 2 more full-time assistants, Noah, a brilliant ceramist who had been working in restaurant kitchens, and Jisu, a logistics nerd with a love for spreadsheets and bubble wrap. Together with Maya, they became my sanity, my accidental family. We started streamlining production without compromising the handmade essence. I invested in a bigger kiln nicknamed Blazer for its terrifying heat and industrial hum. We created systems labeled shelves, built custom racks. There was music, laughter, and occasionally tears when a batch cracked in the firing. But there was rhythm now, real rhythm. And the demand didn't slow down. In fact, it multiplied. A video went viral showing someone unboxing my cups, claiming, "This is what drink in peace feels like." It racked up over 4 million views. Then a popular lifestyle YouTuber featured us in her Morning Rituals That Changed My Life series. Suddenly, loom pottery became aspirational. Influencers reached out not for free pieces, but to pay for rush orders. Magazines emailed to request features. Even a celebrity stylist in LA ordered an entire set for a Netflix client. I should have been thrilled, and part of me was, but with success came pressure. More eyes, more expectations, and worst of all, more opinions. The bigger we got, the louder the criticism became. Some said I'd sold out, that the charm of loom was in its smallness, its scarcity. Others accused me of abandoning real art in favor of commercialism. A few trolls suggested I had a secret investor, or that I wasn't even making the pieces myself. The absurdity of it stung, but I refused to let it slow me down. I still spent hours at the wheel, still glazed every cup by hand, still responded to DMs at 2 a.m. I knew what I had built. So did my customers. That was enough. But the biggest shift came not from a post or an endorsement, but from an email with a subject line that simply read, "Wholesale proposal urgent." It was from a Scandinavian design house known globally for their clean aesthetics and commitment to artisan partnerships. They wanted to commission an exclusive collection with me to be distributed in their flagship stores across Europe. I blinked at the screen. This wasn't like the other proposals. It wasn't flashy. It was considered, respectful. They weren't looking to slap a logo on my mugs. They wanted to co-create. They'd handle distribution and branding in Europe. I'd retain full creative control. The offer was lucrative, more than I'd made in the past year combined. But I hesitated. Could I scale this? Would I lose the soul of what I'd created? I brought it to the team. We sat around a makeshift table drinking matcha from mismatched prototypes and debated. Noah was all for it. "You've worked so hard, Lena. This is the moment." Jisoo was cautious. "We'll need serious infrastructure, but we can do it if we plan smart." Maya looked at me and said, "Do you want this?" And the truth was, I did. Not because of the money, but because it meant my work could live in homes I'd never see, in places I'd never go. It meant the quiet mornings I cherished could echo around the world. We said yes. The following months were the most demanding of my life. We tripled production. I flew to Stockholm for design meetings, touring their flagship gallery like I was sleepwalking. I stood next to executives in all black outfits and tried not to feel like the girl who once packed boxes on her bedroom floor. We launched the Scandinavian collection 6 months later. It was called Still Earth. Simple lines, soft glazes, a focus on tactility and balance. It sold out in 48 hours across 5 countries. But something even more surreal happened next. An old colleague from Trivium Brands messaged me on LinkedIn. His name was Alex, and he had once rolled his eyes during my pitch about texture and user experience in packaging. His message said, "Hey Lena, not sure if you remember me. Just wanted to say congrats on everything you've built. It's honestly inspiring. BTW, I'm actually working on a strategic acquisition project right now, and your name came up. Small world, right, would love to chat." My breath caught. Acquisition. What was he talking about? I played it cool, replied professionally, agreed to a call. On Zoom, a few days later, Alex explained that Trivium's parent company, Mather Group, was looking to diversify into artisan lifestyle brands. Loom pottery was on their radar. They were interested in potential investment or even a full acquisition. I stared into the camera, smile, polite heart pounding. The irony was blinding. I asked all the right questions, took the documents, promised to review with legal. And when I closed the laptop, I burst out laughing. The company that once dismissed me for being too soft, too artistic, too Etsy, now wanted to buy what I built from that very softness. I didn't answer right away. I spent 2 weeks thinking, talking, walking the long loop in Prospect Park with headphones in but no music playing. I ran my fingers over old pieces from my early days. I reread angry emails from the nights when everything was going wrong. I thought about the people I met in my classes, the letters from customers, the photos they sent of their morning rituals. And then I knew this wasn't just a story of success. It was about control, integrity, wholeness. So I called my lawyer and asked one thing. Could we flip the script? Could I buy them instead? At first, it sounded insane. Mather Group was huge. But the more we looked into it, the more cracks we saw. Their consumer division was bleeding money. Their lifestyle brands were underperforming. And Trivium, my old company, was on the verge of being sold off at a fraction of its valuation from 3 years ago. So we made a move. Quietly. Strategically. Through shell entities and negotiation tactics I barely understood but had excellent advisors for. And 6 months later, with a trembling signature on a digital contract, I officially acquired Trivium Brands for $18 million. When the announcement went public, headlines read, "Former employee turned ceramics mogul acquires ex-employer." LinkedIn exploded. My inbox flooded. Old colleagues messaged congratulations laced with disbelief. Some tried to act like we'd always been friends. Others simply ghosted. And me, I walked into the office I once left, carrying a box of succulents and a handmade mug, and now stood at the head of the conference table, calm and unbothered. No speeches, no gloating, just the quiet knowledge that I had turned clay into something unbreakable. The demand hadn't been expected, but maybe deep down I had been ready for it all along. I thought buying Trivium Brands would be the final chapter, the poetic close to a story of rejection and rebirth. But closure, I've learned, rarely arrives with the satisfying thud of a slamming door. More often, it trickles in like light through a crack, illuminating the dust you didn't know was there. Owning the company that once laughed me out of meetings wasn't the revenge fantasy people assumed it to be. There was no boardroom mic drop, no standing ovation. Just me walking through familiar hallways, now stripped of their intimidation, past glass-walled offices with nameplates I used to glance at nervously. The reception desk was the same. The scent coffee toner and whatever cleaning product they still used brought back strange muscle memories. But the people most had changed. Some were gone. A few remained, including Greg. Yes, Greg. The same man who once smirked at my hippie aesthetics and mocked my clay-streaked mugs now reported to a regional VP under my ownership. I didn't fire him. I didn't need to. The company was in transition. Their internal culture, still addicted to hustle, to power, to buzzwords, was crumbling. I saw the cracks immediately. Employees burnt out. Metrics that looked good on paper but hid inefficiencies. A design team that hadn't innovated in years, paralyzed by fear of risk. I didn't want to run Trivium. I had Loon. What I wanted was to reshape the pieces left behind, to salvage what was useful, dissolve what wasn't, and reclaim the narrative. So I restructured. I kept the few departments that still held, value distribution, R&D, and a handful of product managers who were shockingly relieved by the acquisition. I shut down the rest. Within weeks, I started receiving emails. "Hi, Lena, I used to work under you-know-who. Just wanted to say it feels different here now, safer, more human. I joined Trivium thinking I'd change the world. I left disillusioned. Now I'm watching you do what I dreamed of. Thank you." Not all messages were warm. Some were defensive, sarcastic. One former manager wrote, "Hope your handmade empire doesn't collapse under the weight of corporate responsibility." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My actions were louder than any reply. But one confrontation I couldn't avoid was the investor call. The Mather Group still owned a minority stake in Trivium, and part of the acquisition deal required quarterly updates. The call was scheduled for a Monday morning 9 a.m. sharp. I dialed in early. The usual suspects appeared, faces I remembered from my early days in marketing decks and quarterly town halls. Men in blazers, women in stiff smiles. Everyone pretending not to be surprised that the 20-something girl who used to pitch mood boards was now sitting at the head of the table. "Lena, good to see you," said one executive. "Impressive moves you've made already." "Appreciate it," I replied. The foundation was familiar. There were questions about streamlining profitability direction. I answered each one clearly, confidently. When someone questioned whether my artisan-rooted philosophy could mesh with the market's need for scale, I didn't flinch. "I think the market is shifting," I said. "People don't want more, they want better. Loon proved that. We don't need to mass-produce identity, we need to honor it." Silence followed. Not resistance, just recalibration, like they were realizing I hadn't just stumbled into success. I'd engineered it. After the call, Greg cornered me in the hallway. I was reviewing a layout draft with Maya, who had joined me full-time as head of creative. "Lena," he said, his voice level, "I didn't expect you'd keep me around." "Neither did I replied without looking up. He shifted. "I want to be useful. Whatever you think of me, this company means something to me. I gave it 15 years. I finally met his eyes. There was no arrogance there, just weariness, maybe regret. "Then show me," I said. "Not with apologies, with work." And to his credit, he did. Slowly, quietly. He stopped talking over junior staff. He started listening. He even joined one of our internal workshops on values-based branding. No grand gestures, just effort. It was enough. But outside Trivium, another confrontation loomed, one I hadn't expected. A viral thread appeared on Twitter. Someone had pieced together screenshots from my early days, old Etsy posts, Instagram captions, and claimed Loon Pottery was a greenwashed brand built on performative minimalism. The account had thousands of followers. Within hours, others jumped in. Critics accused me of romanticizing struggle, of weaponizing softness, even of exploiting Asian aesthetics without being vocal enough about my identity. I was stunned, not by the existence of criticism that was inevitable, but by its venom, by how quickly strangers can reduce your journey to a caricature. I wanted to fight back, to correct every misstatement, to defend my story. But Maya stopped me. "Lena, listen to me. You are not obligated to bleed in public. You've built something with care. Anyone who truly interacts with your work will feel that. Let your work speak." And so I did. We issued a quiet statement reaffirming our values. I opened our studio for a weekend open house. Customers, students, collaborators. They came. They shared stories. One woman brought a cup she'd bought 3 years earlier. She said it helped her through chemo. Another man brought his daughter, age 7. He said they had a Sunday ritual, making pancakes and choosing their mugs together. She always picked mine. In that moment, I remembered why I started. It wasn't to prove anything. It was to create something that made mornings feel more human. The confrontation wasn't with Greg or investors or critics. It was with the part of me that still believed I had to earn legitimacy by mimicking the structures I'd left behind. But I didn't. The handmade, the imperfect, the quiet, it had value, not as rebellion, as reality. I went back to the studio that night and threw a single mug. No photos, no intention to sell it. Just clay breath and movement. It was slightly lopsided. The handle was a little too thick. I kept it, a reminder. Not all confrontations have to end in battle. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is keep going with grace. The decision came on a Tuesday, though it had been brewing for months. Loon pottery had reached what investors like to call an inflection point. The Scandinavian collaboration had gone. Global retail giants were knocking, and analysts were publishing think pieces titled things like The Unexpected Rise of Emotional Commerce and How Loon Pottery Built a Global Brand Without Breaking Its Soul. I should have been proud, and I was. But I was also exhausted. Between running 2 companies, managing a growing team, flying across time zones for partnerships, and navigating public scrutiny, I was no longer spending my mornings at the wheel. I was barely in the studio. I was spending more time on slide decks and press calls than on clay, and it started to show. Pieces I signed off on began to feel safe, predictable. The color palettes more influenced by market trends than by instinct. The story behind each mug started to sound like marketing copy instead of memory. One night I found myself in a hotel room in Seoul after a 3-hour investor dinner. I'd given the same elevator pitch 5 times, smiled until my face hurt. At midnight, I ordered room service green tea and a fruit plate and opened my inbox. Buried beneath newsletters and press inquiries was a message from a woman named Erin. Hi, Lena. I don't know if you remember me. I was in your beginner pottery class in Queens back in your apartment days. I just wanted to say thank you. I kept making ceramics after that, and I just opened my own little studio in Oregon. It's tiny, but it's mine. I still have the first mug I made with you. It's a little ugly, but I love it. Hope you're still making things too. Erin, I read it twice, then a third time, and then I cried. Not the glamorous kind of crying, the deep, tired sobs of someone who realized they had drifted away from their center. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and remembered what it felt like to touch wet clay and not care if it sold. To name mugs after memories, not marketing angles, to teach people like Erin. The next morning, I called Maya. I think I want to stop growing. There was silence on the other end. Like, shut down, she asked cautiously. No, just stop chasing, stop scaling. Maya didn't try to talk me out of it. She just breathed out slowly and said, Then let's figure out how. The decision was simple in the way truth often is when you finally stop resisting it. We froze all wholesale expansion. We canceled pending deals with 2 major U.S. retailers. I stepped down from day-to-day operations at Trivium and promoted Jisoo to managing director. I kept the ownership but handed off the hustle. Then I drafted a letter to our customers and posted it across all platforms. After years of growth, I've decided to return to small batch seasonal collections. No expansion, no mass production, just intentional work made slowly. Thank you for believing in clay and quietness. I hope you'll stay for what comes next. The response was overwhelming. Emails, comments, letters, some sad, some confused, but most grateful. It turns out people were craving permission to slow down too. Within weeks, everything felt lighter. The pressure lifted. I was back in the studio with Noah, covered in glaze splatters, playlist humming in the background. I started teaching again, small classes of 6, just like before. Erin flew in for one. We hugged like old friends. One Saturday morning, I opened the studio early. The light poured through the window and danced across the shelves. I turned on the wheel and began throwing a set of cups inspired by fog. Pale grays, soft ridges, matte finishes. As the clay turned beneath my fingers, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: stillness. That night, I sat on my rooftop with a cup of tea in one of the fog mugs. Maya joined me. We watched the city hum below. "Do you think we gave up too soon?" she asked. "No," I said. "We chose something else." She nodded. "You know, people will say it's a mistake, that we could have been $100 million brand." "Maybe," I said, "but what's the point of making beautiful things if you lose yourself in the process?" There's a myth in business that you have to keep climbing, that the only direction is up. But clay taught me something else. Sometimes you need to collapse a form before reshaping it. Sometimes you stop spinning to find your center again. That's what I did. I chose fewer customers but deeper stories. I chose mornings in the studio over meetings in skyscrapers. I chose imperfection over polish. I chose presence over performance. And slowly word got out. Loon pottery didn't disappear. It transformed. We became known not for being everywhere, but for being in the moments that mattered. Our pieces were used in weddings, birth announcements, grief rituals, new home blessings. People sent us photos with captions like, "This mug helped me through my divorce," or "I gave this cup to my mom after she beat cancer." We weren't just a brand. We were part of people's lives. And one evening, as I was cleaning up after a private workshop, Greg stopped by the studio. He was in the neighborhood. He looked lighter. "I heard about the shift," he said. "I wanted to say I admire it. Most people don't know how to walk away." I smiled. "I didn't walk away. I just stopped running." He nodded. "You know, Trivium's doing better. We're leaning into slower, more sustainable lines. It's not loon, but it's more human than it used to be." "That's good to hear," I said. "Keep going." After he left, I looked around the studio. At the drying racks, the soft smell of lavender from our window box, the unfinished cups on the counter. I was right where I needed to be. The decision wasn't just about business, it was about becoming whole again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not just successful, but truly complete. Legacy is a funny word. For a long time, I thought it meant buildings with your name etched in metal, a seat at the billion-dollar table, or a biography printed in embossed hardcover. But now, standing barefoot in my studio with clay under my nails and the morning light catching in the drying racks, I understand it differently. Legacy is the note tucked inside a mug saying, "This helped me find my strength again." It's the quiet smile of a student the moment their first piece comes out of the kiln intact. It's the ritual of choosing a cup, a plate, a bowl that feels like home in your hands. Loon pottery wasn't built to last forever. It was built to last where it matters, in memory, in presence, in touch. A few years after stepping back from scaling, I received an invitation to speak at a design conference. Not one of the flashy ones with corporate backers and LED walls, but a smaller gathering hosted in the Catskills focused on intentional creation and human-centered design. I almost said no, but Maya nudged me. "Go," she said, "not as a brand, just as you." So I went. I wore jeans, not a power suit. I didn't prepare slides. I told stories. Stories about failing glazes and cracked bisques, about Aaron's ugly mug and the woman who used mine through chemo, about the time I threw 12 cups and kept none because none felt honest, and when I finished the room didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled. People came up afterward, not to network, but to connect. They showed me pictures of ceramics they made with their kids. One person said, "You made it okay to be small again." I carried that sentence with me because if my legacy was anything I wanted it to be, that. In the years that followed, Loon pottery became a haven. We kept our seasonal collections released only 4 times a year. Every collection came with a handwritten letter. Every piece had a name. We began offering residencies quiet month-long spaces for makers burned out by the grind. Some came from big studios. Others came with nothing but grief and a need to create. I didn't post as much. I wasn't interested in growth hacks or going viral. But word still traveled the way wind carries stories in small towns. Magazines stopped calling, but letters kept arriving. One arrived last winter from a girl in Turkey who wrote, "I bought a single plate from your fall collection. It was more than I could afford, but I use it every morning for breakfast and it reminds me I exist. Thank you." And then one day, out of the blue, Jisoo texted me. Trivium, under her leadership, had started its own artisan incubator. They were funding small creators with no strings attached. "We're not fixing our image," she said. "We're fixing our foundation." I cried when I read it, because legacy is also what you heal in others. Eventually, I gave up my Brooklyn lease. I moved upstate to a small cottage where the air smells like pine, and the nearest coffee shop closes at 3 p.m. I built a small studio out back with wide windows and an old radio that only plays jazz and rain. I still throw mugs. Not as many. Not always to sell. I still teach. Not to make potters, but to remind people they can make something imperfect and still call it theirs. And sometimes on the quietest mornings, I take out the first mug I ever made, the one with the warped handle and glaze that pulled wrong, and I drink from it. It's not beautiful, but it's mine, and it's enough. If I ever have a legacy, let it be this, not that I built a brand, but that I built a space where people could slow down, where imperfections were honored, where presence mattered more than performance, where art wasn't a product, it was a pause, and where a woman who was once laughed out of a boardroom found peace at a potter's wheel, one quiet morning at a time.